Sabtogin can continue nga. First of all, we'll start with Zualtei. She had a blog way back, which was started way back in November 2007. And in her blog, she writes that it is intended to serve as a Mizo heritage site by showcasing Mizo writings and literature to the world at large. Translations of short stories, Mizo short stories. There was no Mizo novel in English yet. So Zoaltei Poonte, through her blog, has done great deeds for research scholars like us, who were still not yet research scholars, almost, but not yet. So it was, almost 20 years back. So what I'd like to ask the three of them is if they could share with the audience their writing history, their writing journey, and what prompts them all to write. Hannah writes both prose as well as poetry. Zualtei, prose and poetry, and Dawngi, poetry. So I think we'll start with Zualtei, and then Dawngi, and then Hannah.
All right, to talk about my journey, my writing journey, I started writing, I don't know exactly at what age, maybe around 9, 10, something like that. And I read a lot of Enid Blyton books when I was a child. And so I think I was very heavily influenced by Enid Blyton, and the things I wrote at that point were a lot like her stories. They were very simple stories and all of that. And then when I went to college, we started studying literature, real literature. And once I got into real literature, I didn't write for a long time. And initially, I started writing mostly prose. I had a blog. This was around 2006, and blogging was very popular among, people who could write in English. And we would follow each other's blogs. We would make comments. We would write our own, updates and all of that. And when I look back on those days, I wish we could still continue that, because we were creating a little world where writing was, was inspiring us, and we were encouraging each other and all of that. So, and then after I started hanging out with Mona and Sherry, Lalthlanpuii, and all of Dawngi and all, I began writing poetry. I never thought of myself as a poet. I was, I didn't really even like reading poetry. I thought I was really bad at it. But eventually I wrote more and more, and that, now I write so much poetry that I actually want to go back to writing prose, because I feel that the future of a writer rests not so much in poetry, but in prose, the creation of prose, the writing of longer prose and all of that. And I would like here to talk a little bit about my blog, the blog that Mami was talking about. Or before that, I had been planning to, read a little something that I wrote in prose. In my bio, I had stated that I am planning to come up with a book very shortly. It's now being processed. And this piece is, it's a collection of both prose and poetry. And this very short prose piece will be in the book, Small Towns and Mountain Views. Okay, so this is called My First Memory. What is your first memory? This was a question on one of those time pass games that came up on my Facebook page a few years ago. I had reflected for a minute, and then I quickly typed out a gist of the following without giving it much thought. Later, I was surprised to see shocked reactions from friends, including a thoughtful comment that said, "No wonder it was my first memory, because it must have been so traumatic." I had never really thought of it as traumatic, but looking back, I can see why it stood out. The first memory I have is of fleeing home during the Lalthlanpuii, early 1966, in fact, early March 1966. And I was all of 3 years and 3 months old. Mother, sisters, grandparents, aunts, cousins. My father was then an important government official, and he could not get away with us. Rebels had come looking for him at the house after dark twice, thrice. I remember our little party climbing one hill after another. Then in the distance, someone hears the low thrum of an approaching plane. Plane's coming. Lie down, lie down. While we had no real idea what was happening, much later we learned the Indian government had sent jet fighters to bomb Aizawl, the only time in history that the Indian Air Force was used to drop bombs on targets within its own territory. At that point in time, we all simply crouched low, motionless and breathless with fear on the steep cliffside. I am securely strapped to my grandfather's back. Then I see my mother below momentarily lose her footing. She slipped, and I call out to her in panic, "Kanu, Kanu." And I remember little else of the before or after of that flight of terror. Just that single traumatic moment suspended in time. So what happened here was, because of the Lalthlanpuii and the fact that we had to flee from Aizawl, we fled to Shillong. And I was then only 3 years old. I had not started any schooling yet. And so I was displaced. I was a displaced person. I had to, learn a whole new culture. I had to learn a whole new language. I started schooling in Shillong in a English medium school. And, this is why I write in English. I write better in English, I express myself better in English than I do in my own mother tongue. Because that was, where I grew up because of my displacement. Okay? And so we still spoke Mizo at home with, the other Mizo refugees, but in school and in society around us, English was what we used. And so that is also why I am interested in Mizo writing in English, and why I started my blog in November 2007. And at that point, I had to chase after people, to send me their poems or whatever writings they had. And some of them, they said, "No, my poems are private. They are not meant to be read by other people," and all of that. And so, I just had to go from strength to strength. And eventually, at this point, I think I have featured around almost 70 different writers who write in English. And it's now almost 18 years, almost 20 years since I started that blog. And as Mommy said, at that point, there were only 2 books which were written in English about Mizos. And nowadays we see more writing in English. And one of the things that we have all noticed is that there's more poetry. There's more poetry written by Mizo writers in English. I don't know why this is so. And I have been going around trying to, tell people, please write more prose because that is more helpful. That will be more helpful in the long run, and all of that. We have a lot of, writers who are very promising. Among them, I would name Candle, little Candle Lalthlanpuii. She's now doing her PhD in Hyderabad. And just very recently, I came across this girl, this young girl. They're all very young to us. Named Shirley Lalthlanpuii. And she had, published this excellent book, a young adult novel, just in December, called, I don't remember the name. I'm a bit nervous at this point. And then also there is RDP, who writes very good poems. She was here earlier. I think she's disappeared somewhere. So we have these writers. And I also want to, use this opportunity right now to say that after my after the publication of my own works is done, I will be bringing out Mizo writing in English in book form. So most of it will be based from my blog, from writers who have already contributed to my blog, but I am also, looking for young people who have not yet featured in the blog. And I will also include, in particular, I want to name about 3 or 4 writers, older generation writers, I should say. Among these are Poonte Zualtei, the former minister. He wrote his autobiography in English, and I came across this, I think it was in 2017 or 18, and it was in English, and I had never heard of it before. And I took a look at it, I went through the pages, and I was so impressed that, the English, the language that is used in the book is very, very simple. Obviously, he was not a literary man. He didn't use beautiful language, the kind that literatists are normally used to. It was written very simple, basic English, but it provided so much historical information. So I got that book, and I included a chapter in my blog, and I am planning to, put in another chapter in the book that I will work on very soon. Okay, so songs well, and then there was Pupi Romhingthanga, IAS. He had written this wonderful travelogue about his, travels, his all over the tourist sites, historical sites in Mizoram, including Chasiama Senona and all those places, right? Now, one of the things, as being a college teacher, having been a college teacher for 40 years, I think it was around 2023 that the university had to come up with a new syllabus for the NEP, and among the units was one on travel writing. And so naturally I suggested Pu Romhingthanga's travelogue, but it was not accepted, probably because it's not in book form. Okay, it's not in book form. I had just put it up on my blog, and that was about it. So I think it was Pankaj, who told me once that, when something is included in a university syllabus, it has to have been published in a book. Yeah. So that was probably why Puroming Tanga's travelogue was rejected. Okay. So I'm hoping to include this in my new book and encourage new forms of writing. I think anyone can do this if you travel a lot. Okay, travel writing. And then, and I also here want to mention this man called Zama, who writes in Mizo. He's now about 73, 74. He was a former MNF volunteer, and he has so far written about 30 books in Mizo, all about the insurgency, his times in the MNF, and all of that. And I discovered that he had actually written 2 books in English. So I was very interested. One was published again just at the beginning of December. It was called Die Like a Man. And in 2014, he had published this book called Untold Atrocity, which was actually released at JNU. All right? And again, I think these are invaluable documentations. So I am hoping to include these as well in my new book. So again, like Pusang Zwala, Pusi Zama uses very basic, simple English. And he told me that his audience, the people who read his books, who requested that he write in English, were people that he knew from the army. They wanted, to read stories, things like this about Mizo army life and all of that. So he had decided to write as best as he could in English. Okay, so I think I'm taking too much time. So I just want to say that will be something to look forward to. And all of this came about from my blog, Mizo Writing in English.
So the question is my writing journey. I would say that it started when I was in class 3. Those times I used to study in Calcutta, and I wrote my diary every day. And the contents, it wasn't much. Got up in the morning, had a bath, had my breakfast, went for prep, and such things. But then I would write that religiously every day. And my first prose piece was when I was in class 9 in government high school. After leaving Calcutta, I joined government high school in class 9. And I was made to write by my teachers, my first trip to Calcutta. So that was the beginning of my writing, I wouldn't say career, my writing journey. And then in school, where poetry is concerned, we would write things like, not we, let's say I, just for fun, chew some gum, simple things like that. I would not like to read the next line because you might get surprised. You might jump out of your seats. Out pops a plum after the third line. Okay, anyway, and then time moved on. And I joined government service. That was in 1985. Most of you would not have been born then. And even when I entered my office, that is SCERT, I was always made to write. Any proposals that had to be written, I don't know, somehow or the other, I would be picked to write that. It was always writing. And then how I moved on to writing poetry is that from 2002, we were transferred, my husband was transferred, and even I was posted there in Calcutta, in Mizoram House. And I had a lot of time in my hands. And that was when I did a lot of writing. And in my bio, actually, I never wrote that. And you have painted me out to be so much greater than what I really am. But then you have left out some crucial points also. Anyway, there, a Mizo poem, Van Lalthlanpuii was born. That was the year 2004. SCERT had just attained 25 years. We were celebrating our silver jubilee. And I was told to write something on the role of women in the Mizo society. And I tried to write a prose. I would sit, write about 2 paragraphs, and then let it go. But then I said, oh, what the hell? I can't write long scripts like this. So one morning I sat down, and in less than an hour, Van Lalthlanpuii, quite a long poem, it came up. And that was put in Zuali's blog. And from there, not the Zualtei, Zuali of the MZU, yeah. Memory Keepers. What was the book released by Zuban? Keepers of Knowledge. Even we contributed. Yeah. And that gained a lot of, I don't know, it stirred up a lot of talk. And then, as I said, having so much time in my hands, I started writing poetry. And then we came back to Aizawl in 2007. And that time, Zualtei had just started her blog, I think. And she was the one who prompted me. Actually, in my book release, my husband even referred to her as my guru. We were classmates in Nehu. Anyway, so through her blog, that prompted me to write more and more and more and more. And in a person's life, creative juices, I don't know for what reason, they come in spurts and in leaps and bounds, let's say, and then they just dry up. And during the years during those years, say from 2009, 10, 11, 12, I wrote a lot. And I got lucky. I had so much platform. I don't know who was behind me, promoting me, I don't know. Because I would be called for, that time I did not even have a book published. I would call for women's poets meet in Shillong, where women poets from all over India were participating. But unluckily, that time I could not attend. And then another opportunity came up. There was this project for making a book of women writers across India by Sahitya Academy and Ramnika Foundation. And luckily I was chosen. I was the only one from Mizoram, and I contributed about 3-4 poems. And there my poem Motherhood, it was translated into Hindi. And my first poetry reading was in 2011 in Sahitya Academy. And I was here, and a young girl was here who was reading my poem in Hindi. We were doing it simultaneously. It was fun. And that was a proud moment for me. That was when I started poetry reading. Actually, I write, and I do not enjoy reading. I was just joking with my friend Mingpui here, Zualtei's elder sister. If I could make her my reader, I will write and you read. Anyway, but then it is a responsibility. When you write something, it is a responsibility to read also. And I have had, as I said, my share of platforms to read my poems in many places in India. And one of my earliest poems, Motherhood, it has been translated into several languages, Manipuri, Oriya, Hindi, and a few others. For that, I thank God. Anyway, friends and even family prompted me to publish my poems in a book. And I began working on that, and this book of butterflies and lullabies and unfinished conversations was published in 2015. And Marfa, Zualtei, and Opia. Dr. Lalthlanpuii, they were very supportive. And at my book launch also, they were there supporting me. Anyway, that was in 2015. And Opia, he keeps saying, don't be a one-book wonder. When is your next book coming out? And I wish he was here, because I am almost done with my second book, and it will also be published by the Writers' Workshop, Calcutta. They are academic publishers, so I don't know why I want them to publish my books again and again. Anyway, I won't do the reading now. So let's say, is that enough? Oh, that's my journey. Yeah, thank you.
So I think the question was about our writing journey and what prompted me to write. In my case, I always felt that, my individual dedication and effort would never land me where I am today. And as the Beatles song goes, I think anything that has to do with my writing career is with a little help from my friends, because I think what pushed me into writing and creating books is always because I've always been sticking to this group of writers or artists, or sticking to the literary circle. Usanga was here, Basanga, the poet, but I always give him credit whenever it comes to how I started writing, because it was in Shillong when we were doing our bachelor's that we really got into poetry, poetry writing and creative writing, because Usanga and his friends they had this small group called the Small Art Project, and they would call any young interested, budding writers or interested college students to attend their workshop and poetry reading. So we'd attend these poetry workshops and readings they had with people like Anjum Hassan, Janice Pariat, who later became very celebrated writers. And sticking to that circle and being with those people really inspired me to kind of move forward with my writing. And later on, it came to people like Zualtei, who I think is one of the pioneers in kind of promoting Mizo writings in English, and also Dawngi as well, because when she was in the SERT, they conducted many poetry writing competitions as well. And somehow we were always a part of those group and circles. And I think that is what that kind of loyalty to literary circles is what motivated me to write. Zualtei was my first editor, so to say, because when I came up with my first draft with When Blackbirds Fly, I didn't know how to move forward with my draft. So I just gave her my draft. I didn't even know whether it was appropriate to do that, just approaching someone without even offering any honorarium or kind of thing. But her enthusiasm in promoting young writers was what kind of gave me the courage to approach her. And I gave her my draft, and she sent back the draft, I think within a month, with the full edited notes and grammar corrections. And I think I owe it a lot to her, even in the book becoming a full published book later on. And like I said, regarding my writing journey, it's always sticking to these literary circles and small groups of friends who are interested in what I'm interested in, is what prompted me to write and what encouraged me to kind of go on with my writing. Du tho na wangin Mizo trongin kan sei lu kanga atui ve thau te bula obring ngen reng hit batel lu chang hi in writing te tura min push tuning ka because our individual effort and dedication alone are never enough, because I feel like writing is a very lonely activity, and there's no reward, there's no deadline like academic assignments and those kind of things. So it really takes your sole dedication to do that, and like I said, that's never enough. So you always need this group or friends or someone who needs to push you and like kind of back you up and encourage you to move forward. And I've been lucky to like have those kind of people in my life. So I think big credit goes to all those people who have been a very important like force in my life in pushing me towards creative writing. And regarding writing in English, I think there is this tendency among the Mizo writing community to feel that if you write in English, you become labeled as in Titsangkang or in Lasap, that kind of thing, because we are easily threatened by this fear of cultural assimilation, that using language or writing, using English or writing in English is a threat to culture or cultural promotion. I think we really have to like do away with this this irrational fear. And also me writing in English is always when people read stories about your place or your people or your culture, I always love the reaction and the response that strangers or outside the community gives me when they read our stories. And I think that is one of the joys of writing in English. And regarding creative writing in general, this morning we had a very interesting discussion in our workplace with my colleague Mami, and I think Zwali was also here, about the burden of representation, because we're writers from the Northeast or writers from Mizoram. We need to write about Mizo culture, about Mizo history and things related to that. And I think in my case, what I write mostly is historical fiction. I think writers and any creative artists have this freedom and individual choice to write whatever they want, whether it be universal themes or elements, or whether it's something regional and local. If a writer wants to represent, let him or her like represent his culture or his history. And if he or she wants to write something about universal love and friendship, I think artists and writers have the freedom to do that. And in my case, I started writing not because of the love of creative writing, but because of this wanting to tell the story of my people and my culture to others. So that is why I feel like representing and writing about Mizo history and culture is my responsibility. So I think this ongoing debate whether regarding representation also largely has to do with what creative writers should be allowed to do, the freedom to choose what they want to write or what they want to represent. Yeah, I think that's it.
Do you feel that as a Mizo writer that you have the luxury to write about anything you want? Because the rest of India, they expect us to write about Ramboy. Because more than a decade back, I presented a paper at Baroda. My paper was on Mizo poetry, the picturesque, and the portrayal of the picturesque in Mizo poetry. But what they were interested was insurgency. So as a Mizo writer writing in English, do you feel that you have the luxury to write about anything you want? And do you feel that you will get published if you write about anything you want?
I think I should start with the second part of the question. I think there is, among mainland publishers, so to say, there is this expectation about the exotic and, about conflict and folk tales. Like, there is a certain expectation because these are the things which have never been in mainstream media in like some 10, 20 years ago. And these are the kind of things which sells. And I think when it comes to, publishers, they always have to take in this issue of what would sell in the market. The business aspect is always bigger than what the creative writing does. And I think that's not fair. And like I just said in my previous answer, creative writers should have the freedom to write what they want, whether it be universal or local or regional or anything. But I think in the case of a Mizo community like ours, where especially in our writings in English, we're still very far behind as compared to other states. If a writer wants, I think there is still that big responsibility to fulfill, because we still have so many areas which are not explored, which have to be explored. And even when I wrote about Rambuai in my first book, it's about the bombing of Aizol. The reason why I chose to write that was because I felt like there was very little literature regarding that kind of story, and it kind of compelled me to write about that. But I think that should be a purely personal choice. It shouldn't be something which is forced by the publisher or the Indian market or the reading public itself. I think it largely depends on the writers.
Zualtei, you mentioned something about real literature. So, real literature. So, even when we study literature in our literature classrooms, we study real literature, or what is considered as high literature. And what is considered as low literature, we study in a paper titled popular fiction. So popular is considered as low. So how will we differentiate this high and low literature, and can we differentiate Mizo writings in English into high and low literature?
Yes, regarding real literature or high or low literature, I have a very soft voice, so I'm so sorry. When we talk about real literature, and earlier when I was talking about real literature, I meant in the sense that the language is often a bit different, as opposed to the language of someone who is not well versed in literature, like Puje Lalsangswala or Pu Si Zama, who were writing very basic, very simple, functional English. Okay, so I was talking on real literature in terms of that. Now, when I consider the fact that there are today so few readers, especially Mizo, especially among our Mizo population, who read in English, much as I would like to encourage high literature, I think we need a lot of popular literature as well to bring in more readers, more people to be interested in what we do, in our art and all of that. So I think that should be, they should go together. I have absolutely, being a literature student, a teacher rather, for so many years, 40 years, I tend to lean towards the literary writings, which have, allusions to myths and stories and legends and that sort of thing that we are used to in literature. But I think very, simple language, simple themes, simple storylines, as long as they are in English, should also be encouraged. So I don't really mind about that. And I just want to add a little something about what Hannah was saying earlier, about that we should try to write a bit more about our Mizo culture or Mizo history or whatever. Because, a few years ago, when I was a judge for the SCRT poetry writing festival that Dawngi would annually organize at the end of every year. One particular year, the theme was winter. The young children, these were all class 11 and 12 students from various schools, they had to write poems on certain themes. That particular year, the theme was on winter. And when, the judges sat together looking over the poems that the children had written, one of our judges, I think I should mention his name, Pusi Lalthlanpuii, said, and the children were writing more in terms of westernized weather, westernized winters. And we have our own winter in Mizoram, which is cold at night, very chilly at night, and quite warm, pleasantly warm in the daytime. So why can't we dwell or focus on our own winters without, talking about snow, which we have never seen. We have never had a drop of snow, perhaps maybe not in Zoaltei, I don't know. So, let's make our writings more authentically Mizo. So I just wanted to add that to what Hannah had said earlier.
Okay, now I think I'll ask them to read from their works. First, we'll start with Hannah.
Yeah, so I'll do a very short reading from my upcoming book, which will probably be coming out this summer if things goes well. It's titled Under a Borrowed Sky, and it's about the refugee crisis in regarding the Myanmar refugee crisis, which was a big issue and which is still a big issue in Mizoram since 2021 when the coup started in Myanmar. And the reason why the idea behind this book is there is a lot of conflicted opinions and ideas about how we welcome and receive these refugees from Myanmar and how it affected Mizo society as well. And because I wanted to maintain a very neutral narrative, I have written in two voices. One is from the lens of the refugee, and one is from the lens of a Mizo girl who became friends with the refugee. And the portion that I'll be reading is from the lens of from the girl from Myanmar who came to Mizoram because of the coup. Home is here, Mother said softly as she pointed to her chest. Home is here, I repeated her words carefully and touched my chest, trying to feel the truth of it, forcing myself to believe the words coming out from my mouth. We were walking on the big metal bridge that divides India and Myanmar, heading towards an uncertain future. It was a strange feeling to be on that midpoint between two places and to go into a new world with different people, different laws, and different language. I looked up at the big writing letters painted on top of the imposing cement gate, "Welcome to India." And I wondered if we would be really welcomed there at all. We were not tourists or guests, but the leftovers of bombs, guns, and fire. Right before we stepped off the bridge onto the other side, I looked down at the river one last time, and it felt like the last piece of my memory drifted away with the flowing water. Home is here. I pressed my hand to my chest again, the only real safe place we had left. We stayed in Zoaltei for a week, a town near the a border town in Mizoram, bustling on the bank of the Chiao River. When I was a little girl, I used to imagine the river as a majestic waterway whenever Father mentioned it in one of his many conversations with his journalist friends. The waters bubbling and sparkling with life, much like the Irrawaddy. But in this dry season and with the whole country in despair, it turned out to be just a thin line of stones and a little narrow trickle of water, separating two worlds, two countries, two cultures. One of my father's friends had agreed to give us shelter at the back of his shop, which was crowded with sacks of rice and dal, and shelves lined with sticky jars of candy and dusty food cans lined up in the shelves. The air inside the room was heavy with the smell of turmeric powder, chicken masala, and other groceries. It was difficult to sleep at night. Zoaltei town was a bustling trade center, and there was hardly any difference between night and day. The constant chatter of people buying and selling all sorts of things, the thudding sound of bulk goods being loaded and unloaded, and the shriveling sound of the wheels of wooden trolleys grinding against the ground. I would lie awake at night, tossing and turning, listening to the scurrying and nibbling sound of the little rats ransacking the goods in the shop. I could hear the sound of their feet tapping as they ran along the shelves. But these were nothing. We had heard louder sounds, people screaming for their lives, the sound of gunfire that wouldn't stop, and explosions. Louder sounds far more immediate and deadlier than just a group of hungry rats looking for food at night. And then after staying at Zoaltei, they arrived to Aizawl, and I just want to read a little bit from this, her first impression of coming to Aizawl as a refugee. There was something about Aizawl which made me forget all about the horrors of what we left behind for some time. The sky was so blue that it made my eyes watery. And to see people walking about in the streets without a care in the world was something I hadn't seen in a long time, a breath of fresh air. The last time I saw someone smiling with genuine happiness was when the little boys and girls who danced their heart out on that Sunday night in the Zoaltei camp, when 3 young volunteers came up with a Bluetooth speaker and sang songs with the kids and danced with them. For the past 2 months, all we had been seeing were faces stricken by hunger, grief, and despair. We all had that look, like a face mask that everyone had to wear. To finally arrive in a city where the sky is blue and people laugh with their hearts almost felt strange and unsettling at first. And Aizawl felt both like a stranger and a warm hug. There were so many familiar sights and smells in the city, thousands of things, places, and people that reminded me of home. But after staying a few weeks, I had come to realize just how little I knew about this place, the people and their ways. I had tried really hard to fit in and adjust like Mother had told me to, but every day I would come across something I didn't quite understand, a Mizo word, a gesture, the taste of food, or what people really mean when they say, though the actual words suggest something different. It wasn't easy to blend in. We had to walk the streets and breathe the air with guilt in our hearts. The quick glances in the streets, in the market, on the bus, and the immediate hush when we approached a group of people chatting. I missed home terribly. But there was nowhere else to go but be here. I didn't know where we could be headed to next, and where we had come from seemed to be disappearing slowly. We were not just thousands of miles away from home, but the home we left behind had been burned, silenced, and buried in violence and death, turning our childhood memories and stories into nothingness. And now we are part of a history that no one here seemed to care about. And where else could we go from here? This is from my upcoming book, Under a Borrowed Sky. Thank you.
This anthology, Women of One World, a Canadian publication. This was published in 2015, and in this book, 3 of my poems are featured. I will read this. It's titled, Disowning Myself. You know, as a woman or even as a human being, there are times when you disown yourself. And I faced this situation way back when I was uprooted from home, from my workplace, and when we had to shift to Calcutta. Goodbye was what I said to myself on that July morning in 2002. I watched myself stand along with the rest of my folks as I waved goodbye and drove off I felt myself disintegrate, saw myself torn in two, and the process of disowning myself had only just begun. Hello, I later said to my new self, a self made lighter with disorientation and self-denial. With self-denial, but so much more heavier, with added responsibility of a new role. Since then, I have now functioned as a protective mother to my 4 children and a somewhat laid-back wife to my equally laid-back man. Irony. The process of disowning myself had not, after all, been a difficult task. My carefree, head-held high walk has been replaced by a careful tread, hugely approved by my children. You see, they've always complained of my proud walk, as they would call it. I believe strong ones, a couple of them, are now replaced by we believe. Safe ones, conventional ones, palatable ones, non-controversial ones. Yes, it's been easy to reschedule my thoughts, my time, my priorities. Meanwhile, my old self smiles back at me from photographs of yesteryears, testimony of a life I left behind. With the other me, I said goodbye to in July '02. My clothes of those days that no longer fit lie neatly packed in my own suitcase. Ceremoniously, I go through them every now and then, with half a mind to do away with them, telling myself they've served their purpose and made me feel good in the past. But I stop and say, no, these are things that take me back to a time when I was whole and undisowned. And so I lie trapped somewhere deep inside my old suitcase, wrapped carelessly in an old green dress, suspended between what was and what will be. Ready now for a resurrection, I tentatively reach out to reclaim lost identity and steer myself towards the unknown, waiting for the new beginning to unveil itself. Thank you.
My poem, this is a very short one. I wrote this in response to a little book of poetry called Free Reign by the Naga writer Easterine Kire. She was supposed to attend this fest, but she had to pull out because of illness. And her book, this little book of poetry, is available in the bookshop up there. So you can buy it if you want to. Okay, so dear Easterine, every time I pick up your book of poetry, it reminds me of a little jewel box, the gleaming gems nestling inside, some small and fragmentary, but all honed and polished to perfection by a master craftsman. The iridescent moonstone of your mother's earth-leavingness that echoes mine so painfully. The diamond hellos to old friends, the wind and rain, fog and moonlight and childhood memories. The glistering amethyst purple rain in April from the Windhover collection. This is the name of a book. From the Windhover collection, you once told me is your favorite book. The tinkle of goat bells in the emerald grass, the lapis lazuli of earthbound clouds, and the little pearl cloud dog which went away to live in heaven with Jesus and his decibels. I will hold this little treasure chest close to my heart, rifling through it oftentimes, till every jewel feels like a dearly loved friend. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I wish we had more time, but there's still one more session where Hannah has to be in. So I think we'll stop here. And I think we'll give a big round of applause for the 3 pioneers of Mizo writing in English. Thank you.